This is by far one of Peter Parker's most exhausting and life-threatening battles, his very first encounter with Morlun. Peter's entire life gets flipped upside down when he meets the eccentric, shoeless, spider-powered millionaire Ezekiel Sims. Zeke takes a very special interest in Peter. We see him donating a lot of money to the school that Peter's working at the time, taking him out to eat, and explaining to him that their spider powers are a lot more than what they seem. He essentially explains that, like, their spider powers aren't just by happenstance, that there's, like, a spiritual element to it, that they are essentially acting out the wishes of a totemic deity. Then warns Peter about Morlun, about a being that feeds on people like him and Pete. But Ezekiel does have a solution for this. He has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a bunker that would keep Peter safe. While Pete is honestly grateful that somebody is actually looking out for him for once, he does have responsibilities and he cannot fulfill them if he locks himself up in there. Later that night, we see him doing just that, fulfilling his responsibilities by using his great power to help others in need, when all of a sudden Pete's spider sense goes absolutely haywire. He gets punched so hard that he goes flying across the street into a car. Peter says that he's never been hit this hard before in his life, not by Thor, not by the Hulk, not by anybody, and for the first time, he doesn't actually have a wisecrack to say in this moment, because seeing Morlun right there in front of him, nothing is funny anymore. Of course, when Peter is faced with a bad guy who is waiting for him to fight back, he is always more than willing to oblige. Spidey learns immediately that not only is this guy strong, but he's pretty damn quick too. After several big swings and a miss, poor Webhead gets his shit rocked yet again. Morlun tries to explain to Spidey that, like, he doesn't want to see him dead, that this is nothing personal, this is just something that he has to do. Morlun then lays out for him how all of this is going to go down, that he doesn't tire, he doesn't get weary, that he is going to pursue Spider-Man, and it may take hours, hell, it may even take days. But eventually, he will grow tired and he will die. And well, this pisses Peter off. He hits Morlun with everything he's got. He just keeps coming. He hits him with everything he can find, but Morlun just keeps coming. He doesn't talk, he doesn't smile, he doesn't crack a joke. He just keeps coming. So Spidey decides that this toe-to-toe fighting is for the birds, and he quickly sees that Morlun is just coming right after him, and he doesn't give a shit who he hurts in the process. All he wants is to get to Pete. Webslinger tries to draw him away from the populated areas. He goes 15 stories up and 2 blocks down the road in a mere matter of seconds. He's also just trying to buy himself some time to think. He learns that Morlun is not only the strongest person he's ever fought, but he's pretty damn fast too. He tackles Pete off the building and the two go free falling to the ground. Spidey in a panic is barely able to wiggle his web shooters free, but as he shoots himself a line, he catches himself, but Morlun keeps falling. And Peter gets to see firsthand, for the first time, what Morlun does to sustain himself as he grabs a random civilian and begins sucking the soul out of her body. Peter kicking Morlun in the face is absolutely outraged. He says that this is supposed to be between them, to leave civilians alone. He tells him if it's a fight he wants, it's a fight he's got, as he begins hitting Morlun with everything he has, punching him over and over again. He just tells him to fall, damn it, fall down. He goes flying back into a car, but Morlun just slings the car right back at Spidey. The car laying on top of him, Peter is telling himself over and over again to get up, but he can't do it in time before Morlun grabs him by the throat. Hitting him dozens of times in a matter of seconds, Peter's ribs crack and break, but he can't let Morlun know that, as he's able to kick and get away. Morlun stoically stays right behind him on his tail. Pete almost wishes that he would talk, because if he would taunt him, that would at least be a sign of some kind of vanity, of some kind of weakness, and right now, he doesn't see any weaknesses. 3 hours into the battle, and Peter has managed to get away long enough to find some clothes for him to change into, to try and buy himself some time to think and come up with a plan. He's thinking that maybe with no Spider-Man around, Morlun will just disappear. With Pete's spider sense going nuts again, Morlun stands in front of him, reminding him that now that he's found him once, he will always be able to find him. Seemingly, Morlun is just getting stronger. Pete is growing more and more exhausted, and Morlun knows how to keep Peter invested in the fight. He knows to put innocent people in danger. Getting his face smashed into the wall, Pete asks himself what he did to deserve to die like this. But dusting himself off and picking himself back up, Peter says that he's not going to die. He reminds himself that he's Spider-Man and to act like it. He's got great power, great responsibility, and a great left hook. Battle lands them in the kitchen of this bar, where Morlun sees an easy out and an easy way to stop this. And Peter is barely able to escape the explosion before Morlun blows the place all to hell. While Morlun is going to give his prey a break in order for him to fetch some fresh clothes, we see Peter running for his life. Getting a break in his fight, we see Peter trying to get the help of Ezekiel Sims, who unfortunately tells him that there's nothing he can do now. Morlun has found him, and Morlun will kill him. Zeke explains he didn't care to offer a helping hand before, but if he gets involved now, all that will happen is that both of them will die. As the webhead swings out completely alone, as he has found himself so many times before, he sees a fire burning in the city and knows that that's Morlun knowing how to get to him. When Peter arrives, he sees Morlun standing there holding a child by the ankle, and all of the pain that he has had, that he's felt from this battle in his body over the last several hours, immediately goes away and is replaced with nothing but rage. Morlun tosses the child, and when Peter goes to catch him, he feels that rage that he's felt so many times before in his life against the bullies that would always try and keep him down. Rage against all of the people that he's fought who just never gave a damn who they hurt. While Spider-Man knows that catching this child was just a distraction so Morlun can get the upper hand again, he doesn't care. He just wants the piece of this freak. Peter goes back to swinging and punching with everything he has. He gets some good shots in, but Morlun barely even feels them. He tells himself over and over again to just keep fighting, just keep swinging. Then drains 50% of the fluid in each one of his web shooters, more than enough webbing to stop a 16-ton truck. But unfortunately, it's not enough to hold him. Peter has learned that with Morlun that he can get some separation, but it's only when he gets too far away that Morlun decides to start hurting innocent people. But right now, he just needs a little bit of space. He just needs to get himself a little bit of time. He knows Morlun is right on his heels, but we see him stealing some change off of a scammer, stopping by a payphone. Now, the first call he makes is into the school to tell them he's not going to be able to make it to work today. As he hears some more screaming from Morlun's attacks starting back up again, he can't help but think, is he this predictable? At this point, Peter's been fighting for 12 hours. He hasn't had any sleep. He hasn't had anything to eat or to drink. He's hurt and he's tired, and a part of him so desperately just wants this to be somebody else's problem. It's long enough for him to go get some rest and then maybe come back and win the day, but he knows he can't let himself do that. He knows that if he does that, innocent people are going to die. So it's back to the battle he goes. We see him sneaking up behind Morlun, hitting him as hard as he can with whatever he can, and while he thinks that this eventually will have to hurt him some. It's a great theory, but it doesn't seem to be working. Morlun then slams him up against the wall. Peter can't breathe. His chest feels like it's on fire. He can't even move. He barely manages to shoot a web line to a car that is speeding by the battle, and it drags Peter down the street just so he can get the chance to get away. With these couple of more precious minutes that he's bought himself, we see him hitting a payphone again. Now, he could try to call the Fantastic Four, but they're out of town right now. Our heroes aren't exactly keeping their names in phone books, and Peter is just trying to tell himself while he's dialing not to black out. Then finally, it hits him. He knows who he needs to talk to, but as we see him calling Mary Jane, it goes to voicemail. With his last quarter, Peter makes a phone call that he never wanted to make, and we see Aunt May picking the phone up and telling him that he sounds terrible. Not wanting to worry her, he tells her that he's just tired and wanted to check in and see how his favorite aunt was doing. And as Aunt May is going on about her day and about doing the laundry, Peter then cuts her off and tells her, "You know I love you, right? Sure, I may get busy, I may not say it, but I'm always thinking it." Tells her, "I love you, and whatever happens, May, always remember that." And as he hangs the phone up, the Predator has found his prey yet again. Peter has always known this moment was coming, that sooner or later he would lose. It's statistics. Nobody wins forever. The only thing that matters is how you face this moment when it's coming, when the cards don't go your way. Pete isn't afraid. He's tired, but not afraid. Back into the fight again, he's trying to tell himself that he won't go down, and all of a sudden, Morlun gets struck in the back. And it would turn out that Ezekiel had changed his mind. Now Peter, for the first time in his life, is experiencing what people must feel when they look up and they see Spider-Man in the sky. He's got to say, it's pretty freaking great. The downside of this is now there are 2 lives on the line, and Pete is going to make sure that Ezekiel isn't making a sacrifice for him. We see the two working in tandem, moving all over the place, hitting Morlun as hard as they can. With their powers so similar, Peter feels like he's just fighting with an older version of himself. Their moment of glory was cut all too short. We see Morlun getting a hold of Ezekiel, beginning to drain his life force from him. With his very soul leaving his body, Zeke apologizes to Peter and tells him that he's sorry that he thought he could hold his own. He falls off the dock into the water below. Morlun is satiated. Now, he's not full. This isn't going to sustain him for forever, but he at least gives Pete some time. Even though he's more tired than he's ever been in his life, we see the webhead diving in the water, searching helplessly, frantically. He looks for 20 minutes, but to no avail. I can't help but think that Ezekiel came, saved his life, helped him, and he died for nothing. As Spidey sees Morlun's blood laying there on the dock, he thinks to himself, well, maybe it's not nothing. Before, he knew nothing about Morlun, but now he can learn something about Morlun, so maybe Ezekiel sacrificed his life to give Spidey a chance. A chance is all Spider-Man has ever needed. After further investigation, it turns out that Morlun's cells are made up of some of the purest DNA that Peter has ever seen. It's an amalgam of all of them, human, animal, bird, insect. And Pete theorizes that these Pete's cells break down and need recharged over time, and this is why he needs to feed on people like Peter. With some actual knowledge of his enemy and possibly a tactical advantage, we see Pete suiting back up and shutting down a nuclear power plant in southern New York, where he's prepared to do whatever it takes to take Morlun out, even if that means that Peter has to go with him. We see the webhead slaving away on his experiment. His spider sense begins nagging at him. He can feel Morlun's arrival. He knows that he's running out of time in every sense of the word. As Morlun and his flunky are outside easily making it past the plant's perimeter defenses, we see Pete putting the final touches on his little experiment. He has created an organic fluid compound of pure radiation. He knows that what he's going to do next could kill him just as easily as Morlun. We see him injecting himself with this radioactive compound anyway. After he shoots himself up with this, he falls to the ground. The pain is beyond description, beyond any kind of imagination. Every nerve in his body is on fire. As he collapses, the web slinger wonders if he's just made a horrible mistake. Finally, we see Morlun making his arrival. Now, he tells the spider, if it's any consolation, where he is so pure, so close to his totemic source, that this feeding should sustain Morlun for a couple hundred of years. While his sacrifice is very unwilling, it will be for a just cause. As he goes to feed on the spider's soul, he immediately draws back in tremendous pain and confusion. Looking at his glowing and rotting hand, Morlun doesn't understand what's happening to him. Rising to his feet, Spider-Man explains that Morlun wanted to feed on the spider in him because it was pure, because it was straight from the spider's mouth, so to speak. While Peter may be many things, pure has never been one of them, as we see him hitting Morlun with everything he has. Punch after punch, we see the radiation exiting Pete's body and going into Morlun's at the point of contact. All the while, Pete explains that he may have never bought into this whole spider totem thing. He doesn't think he was chosen by some deity to have these powers. Even if he was, that spider destined to bite him met the radiation in the lab anyway. And that created him, a child of the spider and the first cousin of the atom. And while Morlun can handle the fist all day long, the radiation is a little harder to swallow. Pete had always theorized after that first dose of radiation if his body could sustain more, but never had a reason to put that theory to the test. Until now, until Morlun, and he asks him how it feels. Beating him over and over again, he asks him how he likes it. How does it feel to be pursued by somebody who's not going to give up? How does he like being on the other side of an irresistible force? Knocking him back, Peter realizes the radiation is working, it's wearing on Morlun, but he can't let him get up. He can't let him catch his breath. He can't risk Morlun getting his strength back. This is Peter's chance, and a chance is all he's ever needed, as we see him hitting Morlun over and over again with everything that he has. Then the Inheritor gets launched back by Peter one final time, where he lays there horribly mutated from this radiation and begging for his life. Even seeing what has become of Morlun, Peter knows that he can't let him go. He stopped him once, sure, but he doesn't know if he could ever do this again. Even if Morlun keeps his word, if he doesn't come back, he'll go after somebody. He has to. Looking at him laying there on the ground, Peter knows that he's vulnerable, that he can be killed right now, and he asks himself, how far is he willing to go? As his spidey sense goes off, we see Peter doesn't have to answer that question. Morlun's tortured assistant steps in at the last second and finishes the job for him. The bullet to the heart is the final straw for Morlun's already decomposing form. And we see him rotting away within seconds, a life that has lived hundreds and hundreds of years, and he tells Peter it was nothing personal. He was just hungry. That's all. The cops and the feds all start arriving at this nuclear power plant, and we see Spidey and Dex both making their getaways. And an exhausted, beat down, and poisoned Spider-Man finally makes it back to the city, where we see him land on a random rooftop and slump down against the wall. In this vulnerable moment, after all of this, we see Peter pray, asking God for a favor. He says, I know that I've been your personal cat toy for the last few years, but do you think maybe we can not do that again for a while? I know the odds of that are just about zero, but you know, maybe for a little bit. I mean, maybe 50 or 60 years, that's not long in your terms, right? Then he says, just kidding, God, just kidding. But I'll bet you knew that, didn't you? And even though his bones have been broken, his muscles are sore, and he's more tired than he's ever been, we then see Spider-Man swinging through the city, screaming in joy because he is alive. Finally, the wall crawler makes it home. We see him rushing to his bathroom, stripping down as fast as possible, ready to hit his bed. After fighting for his life for days on end, he's prepared to sleep for at least a week. As we see him getting his rest, recuperating, sleeping through an entire day into the afternoon of the day after, we then see his apartment door getting unlocked and opened, as his Aunt May was just keeping her promise to stop by and do Peter's laundry, never expecting for her life to change for forever. She's taken aback at first, and she walks out of the room, sees Peter's web shooters laying there. There's no denying at this point that that's what this is. But she gathers herself, takes a look at Peter getting some much-needed rest, and then leaves. Peter then spends the entire next day thinking everything is perfectly normal. He goes and helps people both as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man, and then finally we see a phone call from Aunt May. May clearly is distressed, and Peter wants to know if she's okay, but she answers honestly and tells him no, that she is not. And she tells him to stay still, that the two of them need to talk right now. This, of course, sends Peter into a panic. He's wondering what the hell could possibly be going on and starts to worry about the worst. He imagines that maybe May has went to see a doctor without him and that she has 6 months left to live. Maybe she's coming to break the news to him about somebody else that he loves or cares about. All he knows, he's just driving himself crazy. He can't stand the thoughts of anyone or anything hurting his Aunt May. If anyone was to try that, they'd have to answer to him. But finally, Peter's gonna get an answer to all of his questions. Seeing the torn suit in May's hands, Pete tries to tell her that he can explain, but she tells him that he doesn't have to explain, and he doesn't have to lie to her anymore. She knows his secret, and she knows that he's Spider-Man. She wants to know how he could have lied to her all of these years. She saw his web shooters, and while he tries to explain again, she begins breaking down crying, saying, "Stop it, Peter. Stop lying to me." He explains that he didn't want anything or anyone to hurt her, especially himself. May is pissed about this. She wants to know what Peter thought was going to happen, that she would just keel over and die after hearing it. Tells Peter that your parents died, and that burden never broke me. I carried it the whole time, and then your uncle passed too. When Ben died, so did most of May's world. She could have just gave up. She could have rolled over and died. She tells Peter, "You needed me, so I dealt with it and kept going." She's buried almost every friend, every loved one she's ever had, all of the loss and suffering over the years, all of the loss and suffering that Peter has experienced over the years, and she could do nothing but be there for him when he needed it. She could bear all of that. Why would she fall apart because of this? Peter tries to explain that he was just trying to protect her, and she tells him that she believes him, but he was also trying to protect himself. If she knew, she would have told him, begged him even to stop, and if she did that, then Peter would have had to choose between doing right by her or doing the right thing, period. Instead, he just avoided it, and by doing so, avoided her for years and years, and kept her out what is obviously one of the most important parts of his life. They've lost years of their lives together to a lie, and Peter braces himself and tells her that that's not the only thing he's kept from her. Telling her what he's been doing would require him telling her why he's been doing it. And even though he's afraid that telling her this will actually kill her, May begs him for the truth, and he says that he is the reason that Uncle Ben died. He explains the night that he could have used his powers to stop somebody, but he couldn't be bothered with it, and that guy went on to kill Uncle Ben. He explains that that's why he does all of this. He has to make it up to Ben. He just has to. And seeing the pain in her eyes, he tells her this is exactly what he wanted to avoid, but May corrects him and tells him that he's wrong, that she's the reason that Ben's dead. That night, that they had had an argument, a fight over nothing, as many married couples often have, and Ben doesn't like to argue. May wanted to tell him that it was okay, just to come inside and they'd work it all out in the morning. She didn't, and Ben went for a walk, went to clear his head, went to go get a few things done, and she never saw him again. If she had told him that everything was okay, if she would have just forgiven him, then all that would have never happened. Breaking down crying, she explains to Peter she could have never told him that. She could have never broke his heart. Till now that he's been honest with her, and they've both carried such terrible, unbelievable guilt for years. She says that if they can't forgive themselves, at least they can now forgive each other. She forgives Pete for not sharing this part of his life. She forgives him for what happened to Ben because that was never his fault in the first place. Tells him that she loves him, and no matter who he is or what he is, she will always love him. He tells Aunt May that he's sorry and that he loves her. And as they both hug and share a few tears, May actually begins to laugh for a second. She says that ever since he was a teenager, she knew that he was hiding something, and he was awkward around girls, didn't care for sports, and she thought that he might be gay. She told him she was fine with, that she loves him for exactly who he was, but she knew something was in the closet. She just had no idea it was a costume. Picking her up, the two begin busting out laughing, and Peter can't believe how good it feels for them to actually have fun together again. Then he puts her down and explains to her that he can't give this up, that people depend on him. He tells her he's obligated to Ben's memory, and he tells her that he has this great power, and with great power, but May cuts him off and says, comes great responsibility. I know. Finally, Pete and May sit down, and for the next 2.5 hours, he explains everything to her. He explains how he got his powers and what his life has looked like ever since, a life that she never knew about. And May gets ready to leave. She hugs Peter and tells him that she loves him. She loves him, but she hates that he's doing this, but she's going to try and find a way to live somewhere in the middle. Telling May goodnight as he goes to shut the door, Peter can't help but think that this thing that he's been dreading for most of his life now took less than 3 hours. He's so proud of May and can't believe that she is so strong. We see him suiting up for the night. He grabs that costume and thinks to himself, for all of these years, he felt like he was living in a lie. He was hiding from the world, from himself, and from the person who he loved the most. And for the very first time, he puts that costume on, and he doesn't feel confined, but he feels free, and it's all thanks to her. She has given him his freedom, and May was right that their great power, their great responsibility, is also to each other. And as he swings off, he says to himself that he won't lie to her, and he won't let her down ever again.